My mother called me on a Thursday morning. I was at my desk, halfway through a Q3 production report, coffee going cold on the left side of my keyboard. My phone buzzed. I looked at the screen. The area code was my hometown. I stared at it for one full ring before I picked up. She didn't say hello. She said, "Owen, it's time to come home." I hadn't spoken to her in almost 2 years. Not because of a fight. Not because of some dramatic falling out. Just because there was nothing left to say, and we had both quietly accepted that. In 2 years, she had called me fewer than a dozen times. Most of those calls lasted under 3 minutes. So when she told me it was time to come home, I didn't ask why right away. I just waited. She told me Dorian had been in an accident. 8 months ago, drunk driving. He hit a median on a highway, single car, and he had been in a coma ever since. Marina was struggling. Their son Troy was 4 years old, barely knew his father, and she couldn't manage on her own. The family business was in trouble. My father's heart had been bad since last winter. I listened to all of it without saying a word. And then she said, "We need you to take Dorian's place." I should tell you who Dorian is. And who I am. Because those are two very different answers. Dorian Vale is my older brother. 3 years older. He is the kind of person who walks into a room and makes people feel like they've been waiting for him. Charming, quick, good with people. All the things that matter when your family runs a construction supply business, and your last name is on the door. My father spent 25 years building that company. It was always understood, without anyone saying it out loud, that Dorian would run it one day. That was simply how the Vale family worked. I was the other one. Not in a cruel way, not openly, anyway. I was the responsible one. That's what my mother called me growing up, the one who handled things quietly. Didn't ask for much, didn't cause problems, got good grades, kept his head down, and was told, repeatedly, that being dependable was a virtue. By 23 I had my own apartment. By 25 I had put myself through a textile engineering program without asking my parents for a single dollar. Dorian, at 26, had his car paid off by the family and walked into a management title he hadn't earned. I didn't say anything about that either. That was just how it was. And then I met Marina. Marina Sis was a wedding planner, practical, warm, someone who made plans and kept them. We dated for 2 years and got engaged. The party was in my parents' backyard. 30 people. A warm Saturday evening in early June. I paid for the catering myself. Dorian gave a toast. It was a good toast. The room laughed. He was generous with his words, said Marina was the best thing that had ever happened to his little brother. When the toast ended, he shook her hand. He held it a beat longer than he needed to. I thought nothing of it. 6 months after that toast, I found out what it was covering up. I should tell you who Dorian is. And who I am. Because those are two very different answers. Dorian Vale is my older brother. 3 years older. He is the kind of person who walks into a room and makes people feel like they've been waiting for him. Charming. Quick, good with people, all the things that matter when your family runs a construction supply business and your last name is on the door. My father spent 25 years building that company. It was always understood, without anyone saying it out loud, that Dorian would run it one day. That was simply how the Vale family worked. I was the other one. Not in a cruel way, not openly, anyway. I was the responsible one. That's what my mother called me growing up. The one who handled things quietly. Didn't ask for much, didn't cause problems, got good grades, kept his head down, and was told, repeatedly, that being dependable was a virtue. By 23 I had my own apartment. By 25 I had put myself through a textile engineering program without asking my parents for a single dollar. Dorian, at 26, had his car paid off by the family and walked into a management title he hadn't earned. I didn't say anything about that. That was just how it was. And then I met Marina. Marina Sis was a wedding planner, practical, warm, someone who made plans and kept them. We dated for 2 years and got engaged. The party was in my parents' backyard. 30 people, a warm Saturday evening in early June. I paid for the catering myself. Dorian gave a toast. It was a good toast. The room laughed. He was generous with his words, said Marina was the best thing that had ever happened to his little brother. When it ended, he stepped over and shook her hand. He held it a beat longer than he needed to. I thought nothing of it at the time. 6 months after that toast, I found out what it was covering up. My mother called it dinner. That's how she framed it, just come for dinner, nothing serious. A Tuesday evening, I drove over after work, still in my jacket, keys in my hand. I walked through the front door and stopped. 4 place settings on the dining table. No food. Dorian was already seated on the left. Marina was next to him. My mother sat between them, hands folded on the table like she was chairing a meeting she had prepared for. My father was standing near the hallway, not sitting, not leaving, just standing there, close enough to the door to block it without seeming to mean it. I looked at the table. I looked at the 4 chairs. I knew before anyone said a word. My mother spoke first. She said they wanted to talk. That there were things I needed to hear. That she hoped I would listen calmly. Marina didn't look up. She kept her eyes on the tablecloth when she said it. 3 months pregnant. The baby was Dorian's. They had been together for 6 months. The room went very quiet. I was still holding my keys. I looked at Dorian. He was leaning back slightly in his chair, one arm resting on the table. He met my eyes for a moment, then looked away. Not guilty, just done with the part where he had to say the words. I asked him when it started. He said around the engagement party. I didn't say anything to that. I just stood there and did the math. Marina was 3 months along. They'd been together 6 months. The engagement party was 6 months ago. Every number landed exactly where you'd expect it to. My mother looked at me across the table, direct, steady, the way she looked when she had already decided how something was going to go, and said, "Owen, you need to accept the situation." I set my keys down on the end table by the door. Then I pulled out the empty chair across from Dorian and sat down. I had questions. I asked them, "Where did it happen?" Marina's hands tightened slightly on the table. She said, "My apartment, when I was away on work trips." I had taken 4 trips in the past 6 months. Each one 2 to 5 days. Before the first one, I had given Marina a spare key to my place for emergencies. I told her, she'd had a copy made at some point. Dorian had used it. Every time I was out of the city, my apartment was available, and apparently that was enough. When did it start exactly? Dorian said around the engagement party. Same answer he'd given before, a little flatter this time. I did the math out loud. Marina was 3 months along. The affair had been running 6 months. The engagement party was 6 months ago. There was no gap anywhere in that timeline, no room to reframe it, no ambiguity to reach for. The pregnancy mapped onto the affair with the kind of precision that doesn't leave anything to discuss. Dorian looked at the table for a second. Then he said, "I didn't plan it. It just happened." He said it the way someone says traffic was bad. No heat, no apology, no weight behind it. Just a sentence he needed to get through so the conversation could move on to whatever came next. I remember thinking that was the most clarifying thing he'd said all evening, not the confession, but that shrug of a sentence right after it. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I looked at my mother. Marina still hadn't looked up. She was sitting very still, hands flat on the table now, eyes down. She didn't add anything. She didn't try to explain. She just waited for the room to move on without her having to do more. My mother said Dorian had made a mistake. That these things were complicated. That what mattered now was keeping the family together. She used those words. Family comes first, twice in under 2 minutes. I counted, and that I needed to be the bigger person. She said I had my own career, my own path, that I was going to be fine. Dorian was always going to run the business. That was the plan from the beginning. My father nodded once from the hallway. Slow. He still hadn't said a word. Neither of my parents said sorry. Not once. Not to me. Not in any form. What they said was that they hoped I understood. That I had always been the responsible one. That I had always handled things well. They didn't think I was owed an apology. They thought I was lucky it wasn't worse. I stood up. Put my keys back in my pocket. Walked to the front door. Opened it, stepped through, pulled it shut behind me. No raised voice. No slammed door. No long text sent from the parking lot. I just left. That night I canceled the wedding venue deposit. Non-refundable $1,200, gone the moment I made the call. I texted the photographer. Then I went to my closet and pulled out the gift box I had been building for Marina. Over the past few months, small things I had been adding one at a time, things I had thought she would like. I put it in a bag, drove to a Goodwill drop-off on my way home, and left it there. I was back in my apartment before 10. I didn't fight for any of it. I decided none of it was worth the fight. I want to be clear about something. The anger did come, eventually. But it didn't come in the shape I expected. It didn't arrive as rage or noise. It arrived quietly, over the following weeks, as a series of facts arranging themselves into a picture I couldn't unsee. My brother had used my apartment, my key, and 4 separate windows when I was out of the city to build something on top of my life. And when the time came to handle the fallout, my family sat me down at a table with no food and asked me to be reasonable about it. So I was. Just not in the way they meant. I moved on. Not with a speech, not with a goodbye. I just started building something that was entirely mine. By 30 I was a senior production manager at a major textile manufacturing firm, a real title, earned without a family name on any door. I relocated to a city 5 hours from where I grew up. New apartment, hardwood floors, no one's furniture but my own. I kept the line to my family open just enough a Christmas card, a 2-word reply when my mother texted that no one could claim I had walked away. But nothing came in, either. The channel was there. It was just stone cold. At 31 I met Iris. She was a graphic designer. She laughed at her own jokes. She never once asked me to explain myself or prove that I was worth the uncomplicated version of things. That was the life I was living when my mother called on a Thursday morning. And as I sat at my desk listening to her lay it all out, the coma, Marina struggling, Troy, barely 4 years old, the business losing ground, my father's heart, I kept coming back to the table, the 4-place settings, the no food, my father standing in the hallway with nowhere particular to be. Then she said, "We need you to take Dorian's place." And just like that, it was 5 years ago again. She opened softly. That was always her way. "I know things ended badly between us," she said. "But we're family, Owen. And family comes first." There it was. Same phrase, same placement dropped at the start of the conversation like a hand pressed against a door before you can close it. I didn't say anything. I let her keep going. She told me about the accident. Dorian had been driving home late on a Friday night, 8 months ago, single car. Hit a median on the highway. The paramedics arrived fast, but the damage was already done. He had been in a coma ever since, ongoing specialist care, no timeline on recovery. She said all of it in the same measured voice, like she had rehearsed the order of information. Not cold, just controlled. Then she said Marina was struggling. That Troy, their son, was 4 years old and barely knew his father. That the medical bills were getting difficult to manage. She didn't give me a number. She didn't need to. 8 months of specialist care at any decent facility has a weight to it that doesn't require a figure to land. I did my own math quietly. Troy was 4. Which meant he had been born roughly 7 months after I walked out of my parents' dining room. Right on schedule. Exactly when you'd expect, given a timeline I already knew by heart. I said, "What exactly are you asking me to do?" She didn't hesitate. Move back to the family area. Move in with Marina, help with Troy, help with the household, be a stable presence for the boy. Help get the family business back on track. 11 employees, ongoing contracts, and Dorian had been the one running day-to-day operations. Things had been slipping badly since the accident. She needed someone who understood how to manage, how to show up, how to be reliable. I asked again. "What do you mean be a stable presence?" She said, "We need you to take Dorian's place." I didn't respond right away. I held that sentence and looked at it from every angle. Take Dorian's place. Move into his life, his household, his debt, his child with the woman who had used my apartment key and 6 months of my trust to start that life on top of mine. Step into a business I had never been offered a seat in, absorb $340,000 in outstanding loans coming due in the next few months, and do it all because Dorian was unavailable. She kept going before I could say a word. The business debt was real and pressing. 11 people were depending on those paychecks, 11 employees, their families, people who had nothing to do with any of this. My father's heart had been bad since last winter. The stress wasn't helping, and he couldn't manage the weight of it alone. Marina was a good person in a terrible situation. Troy was 4 years old and innocent. The family needed someone they could count on. I listened to all of it. I let her finish. Then, just before I could speak, she added one more thing. "Your father's will still has your name in it," she said. "Half the business, half the house, the investments, it's all there for you, Owen. But we need you to step up now." She said it gently, almost like a reminder, not a condition. But I had been listening carefully, and the timing was not accidental. The inheritance had been sitting in the background this entire conversation, never mentioned until the exact moment she needed a closing argument. It wasn't offered as a gift. It was offered as a price tag. She was telling me the inheritance was available, that it could still be mine, but that access to it ran through compliance. I said, "I see." 2 words. Flat. I needed a moment to think. She took my silence as progress. Her voice shifted lighter now, a little warmer. "I knew you'd understand," she said. "You've always been the responsible one." She said it like it was still a compliment. That evening I told Iris everything. We sat at the kitchen table, her coffee on her side, mine on mine, and I laid it out start to finish. The call. What my mother had said. The accident, the coma, Marina, Troy, the business, the $340,000, the will. I told it the way I would walk a colleague through a production problem. Chronologically, no editorializing, just the sequence of facts. Iris listened without interrupting. She didn't reach for my hand. She didn't make a face. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she asked, "What do you want to do?" Not what she thought I should do. Not what she was afraid I might do. Just that one question, no weight attached to it, no agenda behind it. I don't think anyone in my family had ever asked me that. Not once. Not about anything that mattered. I told her I needed to think it through. She nodded and picked up her coffee. That was the whole conversation. So I thought it through. The business loans were in Dorian's name, attached to his role as principal operator. I spent 30 minutes confirming it. I had no legal exposure to that debt unless I formally joined as a partner or co-signatory. No one had sent me paperwork. They had simply assumed I would show up. The will was real, my name, half the business, half the house, the investments. But it had never been updated after I left, and the timing of its appearance in this conversation was not an accident. It had surfaced in the same breath as the ask. That told me everything I needed to know about its function. And the cost of doing nothing was also real. The business would likely fail. 11 people would lose their jobs, my father's health would keep declining. Marina and Troy would keep struggling. I let myself sit with all of that. I didn't look away. But none of it was something I had caused. And none of it made me the answer. I found a work envelope in my jacket pocket, standard issue, company logo in the corner. I turned it to the blank side and wrote 4 things down. I didn't show Iris. I just needed to see it in my own handwriting to confirm I was thinking straight. My mother had used the same words twice now. 5 years apart, different stakes, same sentence, accept the situation. The first time, across a dining table, with Marina staring at the tablecloth and Dorian leaning back like none of it was a big deal. The second time, over the phone, in a softer voice, with a 6-figure debt and a will attached. Same words. Same function. Owen absorbs the damage. Owen is reasonable. Owen accepts the situation. I had done it once. It had cost me an engagement, an apartment, and any last belief that my family would choose me when it mattered. I was not going to do it again. I called her the next morning. I didn't wait for her to follow up. I didn't rehearse anything. I just sat down at my kitchen table with my coffee, picked up my phone, and dialed. She answered on the second ring. Her voice lifted immediately, that particular shift, warm and relieved, of someone who thinks the hard part is already over. Owen. I'm glad you called. I said, I want to finish the conversation. I have a few things to say. A brief pause. Then, of course. I knew you'd come around. I said, I haven't. She went quiet. Then she asked what I meant. I told her I understood exactly what the ask was. Moving in with Marina, helping raise Troy. Stepping into a business I had never been offered any part of and absorbing $340,000 in loans that were not mine. Being present. Being reliable. Being Dorian without the name, without the history, and without the 25 years of being the one this family actually built things around. I told her I wanted to be clear about how we got here. 6 months before my wedding, my brother started using my apartment. He had access because Marina had a key. A key I had given her. For emergencies, because I trusted her. He used it every time I was out of the city. 4 trips, 2 to 5 days each time. The engagement party toast, the one where he said Marina was the best thing that had ever happened to his little brother, that toast was already a lie when he gave it. I had paid $1,200 for a wedding venue deposit that same month. Non-refundable. Gone. Marina was 3 months pregnant when they told me. The affair had been running 6 months. I didn't need anyone to explain the math. My mother's voice tightened. She said I was dwelling on the past. That none of that changed what the family needed right now. That people made mistakes and the question was what we did next. I said, no. I'm seeing the pattern. She shifted then. The softness dropped out of her voice and something more practiced came in, faster, tighter, the sound of someone working through a list. Troy was 4 years old and innocent. He had nothing to do with any of this. My father's heart was not good. The stress had taken a real toll, and he couldn't carry this alone. 11 employees were depending on that business, 11 families who had done nothing wrong. Marina was drowning. And then quieter, careful, she said. Your father's will hasn't been changed, Owen. Everything we talked about. But we need you to step up now. I let her finish. Then I said, you've always called me the responsible one. She said yes. That was exactly why she was asking. I said, I know. That's the problem. A beat of silence. I could hear her recalibrating, on the other end of the line, a small shift of someone who has just realized the conversation is not going where she expected. I told her what I was not going to do. I was not going to move in with Marina. I was not going to absorb Dorian's debt or step into a role in a business that had never once been offered to me when things were running fine and Dorian was healthy and the family had no use for a backup. I said, you made your choice 5 years ago. You sat me down at that table and you chose Dorian. He was the one who ran the business, the one with the title, the one you called when things went wrong. I accepted that. What I will not accept is being useful to you now that he can't be. I told her Troy was 4 years old and he deserved stability. I meant that, but I was not that stability. Pretending otherwise would not help him, and we both knew it. She started to say something. I didn't let her finish. I said, "You made your choice. Now live with it." Then I hung up. A few weeks later, a letter arrived from a law firm. It was a standard estate envelope, my name typed out in full on the front, a return address I didn't recognize. I opened it at the kitchen counter. My father's health had deteriorated significantly. The estate was being formally reviewed. My name was still in the will, half the business, half the house, the investments, and the firm was requesting my participation in the probate process. I read it once. Set it down on the counter. Then I called a family law attorney, not to fight for anything, not to make a move, just to understand what my options were and what the process actually required. I made an appointment for the following week. I didn't open the letter again. That Sunday, Iris and I were in our apartment we had moved in together 3 months earlier, a place we had picked out together, different kitchen than the one where I told her about the call. She asked if I was okay. I said yes. Not the way people say it when they aren't. Actually yes. She nodded and poured herself more coffee. Outside the window, the morning was doing what Sunday mornings do, quiet, unhurried, no agenda. The estate letter was still on the counter. I hadn't moved it. I didn't need to do anything with it today. I had built something that was entirely mine. Nobody had handed it to me. Nobody could take it back by withdrawing a name from a document or placing a phone call. That was enough.